If you sew, especially if you are a quilter, you are going to have fabric scraps. I'm Jan Howell, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can make scrappy fabric panels for some really unique sewing projects. As you can see, I have my share of fabric scraps. This is just a little bit of them. I have a video tutorial showing you my method of storing fabric scraps, and you might want to check that out. Oh, I just love the random look of different colors and prints thrown together. I guess it's the hippie part of me and the artist coming out in my sewing projects. So what do you do with these fabric panels? Oh, you can make so many fun things. You can make zipper pouches. I have a sewing tutorial showing you how to do those. You can frame them. You can make stuffed hearts, placemats. I have a fun tutorial coming up showing you how to do this. So stay tuned for that. This process is quite addicting, and you're not going to want to stop with just one panel. This is a beginner sewing project, something really fun to do. So gather up your fabric scraps and let's get started. Let's go over the materials and supplies that you'll need. You'll need, of course, some fabric scraps, a pair of paper scissors, and if you have some kind of paper cutter, that will come in handy as well, but not necessary. A pair of fabric scissors, a rotary cutter, mat, and a ruler. You'll need to grab your 1/4 inch presser foot. If you don't have a 1/4 inch presser foot, you can just use your regular foot. The seams are going to be 1/4 inches. If you have one of these seam presses or seam rollers, that's kind of handy. You can just finger press, as I'll show you in just a bit. And of course, you'll need your sewing machine, an iron, and an ironing board. Another unusual item that you'll need, some magazine pages, or you can use scrap paper. You'll need some fusible fleece, or you can use regular cotton batting as well. And I'll put links in the description below. If you ever have a question about what products I use or what items I use, where I get them, or how to use them, make sure you ask in the comment section. And I will usually put links where you can get them in the description. First thing that you're going to do is cut out some paper pieces. I like to use just 6 by 6. Of course, in this project, you can make these panels as big as you want, but what I find helpful is to not start with such a big panel like this, but to just do little 6 by 6 inch panels, and then we're going to sew those together to make a bigger panel. And you can, like I say, make this as big as you want, so that you can cut out different items with your projects. So I have cut out several pieces of 6 by 6 inch squares of the paper. I'll set those aside. It's nice to have a little basket that you can sit by the side of your sewing machine while you're doing this project, so that you have these pieces on hand. I'm going to add a few other colors to this batch. You want to get a good variety, or you can use your favorite colors, whatever. Set that aside for now. I'm going to get out my sewing machine, change my foot to the 1/4 inch presser foot, and this is only if you have one. I'm just using a neutral color of thread, and we'll be using a stitch that's 2.5 in length. I have my scraps here. I have my paper pieces handy. You'll want to get your scissors and have them handy. I'm going to plug in my iron and get that heated and ready to go. Before you get started, it's a good idea to go through your scraps and find the ones that need pressing and get the wrinkles out. The first piece that you'll put down, I like to kind of start with a smaller piece of fabric. It doesn't have to be perfectly square, and place it right side up, just somewhere in the middle of the paper. I'll find another piece that is the same length as one of the sides, and I'm going to trim that down and place the right side facing down on top of that, and just line up the edge there. So this is kind of like artwork. There's no really set way to do this as far as patterns go, but I'm going to give you several tips of how to do this. So when you're stitching in the middle part of the paper, you don't need to back stitch at the beginning at the end, but I'll show you when we get towards the outside where you'll need to backstitch. I'm using my 1/4 inch presser foot, and I'll just start stitching there. You'll fold that over, and you can either finger press or you can use your little roller tool to flatten out that seam. I can leave that long or I can cut it off. I think I will leave it at that length and choose another fabric. So you can see how that's not really quite straight. You want the top piece to have a straight edge. You can even go at an angle like this, and we'll be flipping it that way. So you can kind of take the piece that you want to add and adjust the colors too to see what you want to add next. I think I will add this green, and I'm going to put it at a little bit of an angle. So I'll start right there at that edge. Now this is the edge of the paper, so I want to backstitch right there. And I'm going to flip that up first before I cut it. Flatten out my seam. And then just so you can tell where the edge of the paper is, this doesn't have to be right against the edge of the paper, but kind of trim it down so that you can kind of have an idea of how much you need to add. So I think I'm going to add something to that edge, maybe just a little strip of black. So see how that is on an angle? I want to make sure if I were to put it like this and then flip it up, that would make this not really even with that edge. So I'm going to let that extend out a little bit past there. So let's find another longer piece. Back stitching because I'm at the edge of the paper. I'm going to pull that up a little bit so I can trim some of that off. See, even smaller scraps are going to work. Now with black, if this were a lighter color and I was folding that over a dark piece, this overlap, this extra fabric is going to show through. So I'll definitely want to trim that off if there were a lighter piece, and I'm going to trim it off because it is kind of bulky. But it doesn't have to be a perfect straight line. So we just have a few little places that need to be covered still. Put those bigger scraps back in your basket. Just have a little area right here to cover. Okay, that's one panel. I'll set that aside. So I'm going to do a couple of these so you can see different situations of what you might encounter. while doing this. Let's find a centerpiece to start with. Right side facing up. That looks pretty cute, doesn't it? So you don't want to sew all of that, because when that opens up, well, you could, but you're going to have to incorporate this edge, and this will all be wasted, and then you'll have that sewn down, and it's hard to, you'll have to unpick. So I hope that makes sense. So it's easier just to get that close to the while you're sewing it together. So again, on that edge by the paper edge, I'm going to backstitch. Now you can see how that is a white, and I don't want to see that black. So we definitely want to trim that off. You want to make sure that when it opens up, it's going to cover where you want it to. So look, if I were to sew that, it's not going to quite come to the edge. I'm going to cut that off so I can have a better idea. I learned some of this stuff the hard way when I was unpicking, but if you can kind of use some of these tips. So I'm not going to be able to go over there. I want it to come to the edge. Again, I want to find that place and make sure I'm covering that. So you kind of work the angle, and some pieces may not be long enough, so I'm going to add a little bit more to that length. Okay, so this is an issue. See how that fabric, there's some kind of cut right there. So no worries, I'm glad this came up. I'm going to just fold it back over, and I have a little space here to work through. So I'm going to bring that more of an angle. So there's the cut in the fabric. So it needs to come about like that. And I luckily still have enough fabric to go to the end. I'm just going to... Okay, so not a big deal. You can see that it's not coming quite to the edge. We want these panels to be square, so I'll add another little strip of something. I have 4 panels that I'm going to sew together, but before we sew the panels together, I'm going to give them a good pressing. I want to square off the edges with the paper edges. You could also do this with just your scissors if you wanted to. Let me show you what you do with the paper. So this is kind of fun. It's like therapeutic almost. So you can sew up a bunch of panels and then maybe do this while you're watching a video or something. I'm just going to rip off the paper. That's why it's helpful when you sew the edges, because sometimes if you don't backstitch, that seam will start to come undone when you pull the paper off. And I find that using magazine paper is a lot thinner and it rips off a lot easier. Take a minute to pull all the paper off. Okay, so now you find that there isn't an edge really to pull off. You just wrinkle the paper up and kind of rip it, and then you can have access to pull it off. Really quite fun. All right. I'm going to take it to the ironing board and give it a good pressing. Once you have your panels trimmed and pressed, arrange them how you would like them look. And then I'm going to place right sides together. So 2 together, down that seam there, open that up. Sew the other 2 together and open that up, and then we'll flip it and sew that together. And you'll definitely want to back stitch at the beginning and at the end of the seam. Now if you find the feed dog's having a hard time grabbing the fabric on the end of the fabric, I'm going to show you a trick. Otherwise, see, it bunches up. That doesn't really look good underneath. Kind of chews up, pulls the fabric down into the sewing machine. So if you're working with lighter fabrics, what I like to do is come up a ways, probably about at least a 1/2 inch away from the edge, and back stitch, and then come forward. Or you can also use a scrap piece of fabric to start the seam. So I'm going to sew those other 2 panels together back to back so I don't have that issue. And I'll show you how that works. Just bring your presser foot underneath and it will just feel like it has something to grab. It works a lot better, I find. So you don't have a lot of bulk, is to press one seam allowance to one side and the other facing the other side and line up that seam so you have less bulk to go over. I hope that makes sense. Pin or clip that in place and then sew your seam. Beautiful, right? That is so fun. I'm going to go press that seam again and we are ready for the next step. You'll want to stabilize the fabric with some kind of stabilizing material. I really like this fusible fleece. You can also use just cotton batting, and then especially if you're going to quilt it, you can put this on the back of it and then do your quilting. In the previous tutorial where I showed you how to make the zipper pouches, I used this soft and stable foam if you want more of a puffy look. So what you would do with that, instead of ironing it onto your fabric panel, would be to put that on, safety pin it in place several places, and then do your quilting pattern or lines or whatever, however you want to do that if you want a quilted look. So I'm going to place wrong side of the panel onto the stabilizer. So you're not getting the sticky on your iron or on your ironing pad. I'm going to cut that down to size. I just got this new rotating cutting mat that's great for cutting out quilting pieces, and without having to move the fabric, you can just spin it around, and I'm really liking that. I just got that last week. So I'm going to cut that down. Take that to the ironing board. Make sure the bumpy side is facing up. So there you have it. Scrappy fabric panel ready for all your crafting and sewing projects. Oh, the things that you can make with this stuff is great. Like I said, you can make them as big as you want. You can make, instead of sewing 4 panels together, you can just do one big panel like I have here. Just depends on what look you want. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found that tutorial enjoyable. I hope it's a skill that you can use to make something fun, something unique. And be sure to stay tuned because I have some fun things coming up showing you some projects using these panels. If you have questions or comments, as always, leave a comment in the section below. If you like my content, like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. For other fun and interesting crafting and sewing ideas, check out my website, youmakeitsimple.com. I have patterns there, I have tutorials, and a lot of other fun things that you might find interesting. And be sure to click on that bell so that you can be notified when I do put new things up. Have a wonderful day, have fun sewing, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.